Good morning. Welcome to our single-family residential Performa workshop. We're going to get started here this morning. We would like to welcome Edward Chandler. He's a loan originator with Grand Bridge Real Estate Capital to speak with us this morning. We're super happy to have him. We hope that you get a lot out of this workshop. We will be posting a link to the documents in case you didn't download them the other day. And also we did make, Edward provided us with some updates to them. So we've got new documents for you or updated documents for you. And the link to those documents is in the chat. So please go there and download them. That might help you while you're following along. So we'd like to welcome Edward. Edward brings more than 35 years of commercial real estate finance experience to the Indianapolis market. He's served in various lending capacities with insurance companies, banks, and national mortgage companies. Previously, he worked at One America, the Travelers, Lincoln National Life, American Fletcher Mortgage Corporation, Banc One of Indiana, Banc One Mortgage Corporation, and LJ Melody and Co. Company. He has relationships with national lenders, including insurance companies, banks, and CMBS lenders during his tenure. Edward has closed well more than $1.5 billion in commercial real estate financing involving office, retail, multifamily, industrial land development, and special purpose real estate. Edward works with Jane Hendrickson. If you were on our very first webinar session, you got to see the housing development that she is involved in Huntingburg. And so we're very excited to have Edward join us this morning to share his vast experience with us. So Edward, if you'd like to join me this morning. Great. I'm going to let you take it away. But before I do, I want to remind everybody that you can put your questions in the chat. If it's a clarifying question, I will pop in and ask Edward to clarify something. Otherwise, we'll just hold the questions until he pauses for questions. And we will also do our Q&A at the end. We are recording this session and it will be available on our website probably at the end of this week or the beginning of next week. So thank you again for joining us this morning. And thank you, Edward, for being here to share your expertise with us.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a happy day. It's a market that I find very interesting and it's more than 35 years. It's closer to 45. It's a market that I participate in both on the commercial side and residential side. And in the last 12 months, it's been a phenomenal market. First of all, can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I just have a black screen, so I can't see. So I'd like to start my discussion today with a couple of objectives that I'd like to accomplish. One, I want to start talking about this very unusual and what I think is a phenomenal market that we're in right now, dealing with real estate, both on single family and then on the commercial side. And our emphasis today is on single family subdivision analysis and single family residential. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about the economy and where we are to start. And then we'll get into a high level discussion and approach of how to approach what is essentially a very complicated subdivision analysis and process. So a little bit of history in my involvement in single family subdivisions as I started many years ago working for American Fletcher National Bank in Indianapolis. We were doing subdivisions throughout the Midwest, primarily in Indianapolis and Louisville and Kentucky and wherever. But the strategy and the structure that was done at that point in time is that for the most part, you had a subdivision development by a developer who was also doing, I call that the horizontal development, but they were also participating in the vertical development, actually building the houses. And over time, they made profit, not so much on the lot development, but as they did from the houses. Banks were interested in that type of a lending strategy because it gave them access to not only the development loans for the land, but also the project and vertical loans from the builders, and everyone made money. So let's fast forward from 1980s to 1990, which was a severe recession. In the early 90s, people don't remember that, but there was virtually minimal amount of business being done. And compare that to where we are today, which is influenced heavily, in my opinion, by the Great Recession in 2000. It started in single family residential in 2005 through 2008. We had a situation where the market literally fell apart, and it was a disastrous situation. We had those developers that were doing the vertical and the horizontal go bankrupt. So the market evolved now, and 2008, 2009, single family residential was really not a preferred development type. We had a market where people were going out of losing their homes. Children were seeing that their parents were losing their homes. So the market for the multifamily market started to expand quite a bit. And from, I'd say, 2009, 2010, when we first got out of that Great Recession, through December, or I'd say third quarter of 2019, the vast majority of the emphasis in housing was through multifamily. We still had single family development, but not at the velocity that we had in the past. So fast forward to what happened about a year ago. And we were hit with something that I've never seen before. I can remember talking to my grandfather, who in 1918 was a doughboy in World War I, and he told me about the Spanish flu, but I was a young kid when he was telling me about that and how horrible that was. And that's my only relationship with the Spanish flu. But anyway, we go to the pandemic, and we have this, you have to look at April of 2020 as the low point in employment. That's when most people are off work, unemployed. We had a horrible situation. The US government, through their fiscal and monetary policy, started stimulating the economy. And we still feel that effects on the commercial side today more than we do on the residential. The phenomenal thing that happened in single family residential, and we'll start with what's up on the screen now, which is US housing starts. And this is done in 2020, and this is a national basis. And you can see over the months how that has steadily increased, starting in May through December. And those are significant. And that's, for example, December was almost 1.7 million new housing starts. Multifamily has, as you can see in January, kind of leveled off and really hasn't recovered that much. It's still at 331,000 units. Is still profitable, but it's still active. So I bring that down into where we are in Indiana today. And in 2019, the year-over-year changes in 2019 in closed sales was 12.2% increase over 2018 over 19 over 18, and then 20 over 19 was 22% increase. That's a significant increase. And the median sale prices are increased at 9.7%, and this is for Indiana. And 19 over 18 and 20 over 19, it was almost 12%. Those are significant increases when you consider that we were hit with a pandemic in a market that the commercial market was reeling. And the point I'm trying to make here is, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I wanted to ask you to scroll down a little bit. We had a comment from somebody who says that they have to see your statistics. Thank you.
Okay. I have control over this. Okay. All
Yes,
right.
you do.
I'm sorry. I'm
Thanks.
sorry. I'm sorry.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
So if you look at Indiana, you can see the increases, and the median sales price is 185,000. And then on the next page, you're going to look at statistics from the Indiana Association of Realtors, and it talks about shows the pending sales and then the actual closed sales. Again, those are very strong numbers for a period of time where we were in a pandemic, and it reinforces the point that single-family housing, single-family residential, uh, incredibly has gained momentum and strength in this period. And perhaps, I mean, there's lots of reasons for it. Subjectively, we're spending more time at home. I'm at home now. I haven't been in my office since March. They're not allowed to go back in. But more importantly, people are not spending the money going to ball games or movies or dinners or socially. And so that money they're saving, they're able to generate a down payment that enables them to buy a home. And that's probably going to continue for a while. You question, how much of that is, I'm sorry about this. Okay. All right. How much of that is, as we call, paid forward? I mean, how much of the demand for housing is going forward, and will this continue? And that's an issue to talk about when on doing future single family subdivisions. But I show on the next page, and I focused on the counties that are involved in this regional group here, and I was just showing the homes that were closed in 2019 and 20, and then the median prices for 2019 and 2020. And for the most part, everyone had a significant increase 2019, 2020. Again, a year ago, if I would tell somebody this is going to happen in single family residential, they would say, yeah, I don't think I agree with you. And I can see that. I can understand why that would be the case. But this is an unusual time that we're in. I go down and just kind of highlight where we are on the employment side. And I keyed in on this December 20th or December 2020 is the last available data that was released a month ago, this month. And I compared that to December 2019. And these are the number of people employed. And I compare that to the unemployment rate at the various counties and the state of Indiana, the United States. I think the remarkable thing is the amount of we've gained our employment back essentially almost. Monroe County is down about 3,000 employees. I think I've got an error there on Washington. Washington's not 31,000; it should be 13,985. I'm sorry about that, but so for the most part, all these counties in our region have regained their employment, and perhaps that's because they're manufacturing based, they're agricultural based, they're not so much service employees like they are in my marketplace and in the country. You look at the United States, and we're still almost 10 million people are still unemployed from where we were a year ago. So that's what the national media loves to talk about. And that we're 10, 11 million people still unemployed. And that is a fact. I just don't think I don't see it in Indiana. I mean, in Indiana, yes, looks like we're about 25,000 people under where we were a year ago, but still pretty good. So the next page on that is just some more statistics from 2019, kind of giving you an indication of where things are from where we are today. And then the last part of that is what I think are typical first mortgage single family interest rates today. A 15-year term in amort's 275, a 30-year term in amortization is 3%, still quite low. These are not cast in stone rates, but I did call a couple of my mortgage bankers yesterday on the single family side, and this is what they were telling me they would provide. But that's just more of an indicator. Still very, very low interest rates. I think the issue that you have to think about is, from my perspective, I think my first home mortgage, I paid a rate of 12.58%, and now we're this low. Are rates ever going to go back up? My indication is it's not for 3 to 5 years. The Fed's motivated to keep rates low, to stimulate the economy. And how are they doing that? They're buying what's called mortgage-backed securities. Mortgage-backed securities are Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans that are pooled, and then they buy those, creating a demand, which increases the price. If you understand how the mechanics work, then the rates are low. So the point I'm trying to make, single-family mortgages go into the mortgage-backed pool, which is created by the Fed, which then creates a demand for housing and avails low interest rates and mortgages to homeowners, the end user. And I see that continuing for a while. So that's kind of where we are in the marketplace. I would also say that it looks like nationally, about 66% of the households are in homes that they own. And in other there are obviously exceptions to that. I can see some parts of Indianapolis being in the high or low 80% range. I'm not sure where they are in some of these counties. I didn't have time to drill down into that. So what I'm suggesting is that in the Midwest, the home ownership rate in the third quarter 2020 was 71%. In the United States was 67%. In the Midwest, basically led in home ownership rates. So our households, for the most part, they like single family housing, and that market has gotten really strong. So U.S. economy is projected to increase about 4% this year in 2021. I've had some reports as high as 5%. The stimulus that the Fed's and the government's going to give us is going to avail itself to that growth rate. So we're set up in the single family residential market very positively. And that's surprising to me. Again, a year back, my market is not just single family residential, it's commercial. And some of the multifamily is very active, industrial is very active, retail is challenged. Office space, we're not sure where that's going to be because we're unsure of the percentage of office users compared to the past. And then you got self-storage and you've got hotels, which are just a real problem because we don't know where the demand's going to come from. It will return. We just don't know when and in what form. So at this point, I'm happy to take any questions about the market if you want. I just wanted to lay the groundwork and the basis for where we are right now.
Okay, so if you have questions, go ahead and pop them into the chat. Right now, Edward, all the questions that we've had were about how to get the documents. So we've managed to I think, resolve all of those. So anybody have any questions? Well, I'm going to go with everything's been pretty clear. So
okay.
You can
all right. So let's get into where the market is right now for single family residential subdivisions. So and this presentation is a high level presentation. And I would start off by telling you where the market is right now with the lending community. Your most probable lender for these things, and the most probable source of capital is going to come from a bank. And then you got the equity contribution, which can come from cash and then also what I call government capital. And government capital is an increasingly important source of capital. And that can take the form of TIFs or other programs that they have or actual ownership. And I've seen, for the most part, in the major markets, there's not any development out there that doesn't have government capital, either in the form of tax abatement, TIFs, or whatever. Single family residential is a different situation. That is not easily obtained, but it's driven by what local government officials want as far as housing for their communities. So if you go to a bank today, they're going to, and these are down to fairway information. I mean, there's always exceptions to everything I say, and that's why you use a professional to help you obtain the financing. But the first thing you do is you got to find the land, the base land that you're going to buy to develop into a subdivision. And those lenders today are probably going to lend you at most 60% of your acquisition cost. And that's just buying the raw land. The next thing they're going to want you to do is a market analysis, and a market analysis prepared by a professional. There's several of those in the marketplace that you can get and do a very good job with that. Some people ask me what's the best source, and I would suggest in the sub market that we're talking about, I would look for an individual that's in an appraisal shop that's got an MAI designation and you should ask if they've got the experience in doing market analysis for subdivisions. And if they do, they're probably going to be a very good source for the bank, because the bank's going to want someone with credibility. And the market analysis can be broad and it can be specific, but you got to bring the market analysis down to the level of the subject property. So you got raw land, and then they're gonna hold that raw land in like a separate loan account, and then they're going to do individual section loans. And those section loans are going to be the actual loans where you take a piece of the raw land, plat it, put streets, sewers, whatever, and get it ready for development. And they're going to do a 75% loan to value on what they call a discounted cash flow analysis. And I'm not using this checklist yet, but I'm just talking about the market. A lot of that's heavily dependent upon the lot absorption that's going to be determined by the market analysis. The other thing is sectional development. The first sections are always the hardest because you have a lot more upfront costs than the rest of the sections that will be developed. And for the most part, you're going to look at banks who want 75% of the lot sales to repay that entire sectional loan. So the absorption analysis has to be fairly stout and supported. Now, the next thing is, when can we start a new section? Usually when 50% of the existing section is sold, then they'll start considering another section loan. And it's the velocity of the sales, whether it's 40% of sales or 70% of sales. It's how fast you're selling and what the prices you're obtaining. Are you hitting your targets for the market analysis? I can tell you that in our marketplace up here, we've seen raw land prices increase 12 to 15% a year. And that's because the demand for single family housing is really strong. The velocity of lot sales has been very strong, which reflects the prices that you're getting. And the banks really don't like to do lot development because they don't. Again, we talked about prior years, the developer do the lot development horizontal, then they do the vertical. So I'm just talking about the market, the lending market. And I'll get into submission checklist in a minute. Someone asked that question. And we can start that now. So does anyone have any questions about where the current financing market is today?
Not really, but we do have a question about the use of the ROI housing study as a market study. Is that something that would be acceptable to the banks, or would it need to be more detailed? Our
Well,
study
I mean,
is pretty detailed, but
so
it's also pretty broad.
yeah, so go to page on my handout. Let's see here. Go to page 6. Okay. So these are the levels of market study. Okay. And they range from what they call inferred demand analysis, which is instinctive knowledge, historical data, and judgment, down to fundamental analysis, which is really quantitative analysis. Your market study that you prepared would start as the basis for doing a market study for, say, a 60-acre lot development. They would have to start with that, and then they'd start drilling down into the individual lots or individual development. You know, what is the home price you're going for was the first thing that they determined, and then what are the competition? What are the inferred lot prices going to be? What are the costs? So your market study, which I read, is good as far as creating demand, and my initial analysis here kind of the market kind of reinforces that. But they're going to want a more detailed analysis drilled brought down to the subject property. And if you look at it, it's quite complicated. Those reports can be $5,000 to $15,000 to obtain, depending on the nature of where you're developing it and what the size of the land and how much information is available. So we go back to the first page. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So this checklist that I got is really things that, and again, I'm looking for, again, we talked about the source of capital coming from the lending side, and then the equity side is important, and then the government capital side, which, but all those have to be identified. But this checklist is something that you're not only going to need for the bank, but if you're a developer or whoever, you're going to need to know all this information. And first thing is, what's your requested loan amount? How many sections? What are you going to do? That's really comes at the end of your market analysis. And then the borrower information is important. Some of this stuff doesn't need to be presented at first, but the most important thing is, what's the background of the developer? What's his experience in developing this property and single family residential? That's important. And then assuming that that experience passes muster, then you're going to want to know the financial strength of the developer and the borrowing entity. Can they carry the property outside of the capital structure for that property? If there are problems or hiccups, can they afford to contribute cash? So that gets down to the borrower section. They're going to know personal financial statements and list of all contingent liabilities and all sorts of things. And again, you'll need an expert to help you go through that. Item 3 is important. You got to have a list of all your key third parties. Who's your attorney, engineer, your market analysis contractor, contacts with the city and zoning and general contractor who's doing that work, utilities, that type of thing. Then we get down to number 4, which is land productivity analysis. And that gets down to descriptions and understanding of the site description, the size, the zoning. Flood zone's important, utility availability for water, sewer, and power. Then you got a proposed development plan, number of lots, lot sizes, your amenity package, if you've got one, your marketing strategy. The market analysis is important here. This is where that's going to generate a lot of that information. Talks about lot prices, absorption analysis, timing of the platting, timing of the lot sales, estimated starts and phases. None of this is cast in stone. This is, if you're starting from a raw land perspective, and you've in your mind got to come up with this information. It changes over time. It's dynamic. If you had a subdivision ready to go today, and it would probably absorb very quickly today because we're in a great market for single family residential. That could change. If we go back to where we were 2 years ago, it was more normalized, and it wasn't absorbing the way it was today, and that's what the data show. This kind of flow analysis, we'll get into that, but that's some of the models that I showed as an example. On page 2 here, we talk about your expected entitlements provided by local governments, and that's where this group can get involved with, what is it that they're going to provide for you? Then that's the government capital. What are they going to do to help you get zoning and utility and legal concessions, those type of things? Those have real value. They may not have cash value, but they add value to the property. And then item F is really the detailed development budget. Says the sources and uses and sources of funds. That's kind of self-explanatory. You got the land acquisition, your land development costs, soft costs, which is interest carry, zoning, legal, marketing, sales costs, financing fees. And number 4, F is F sub paragraph 4, your sources of funds has got to be identified. And that's debt, equity, cash. If it's mezzanine financing on the equity side, you have a private investor that'll come in and he doesn't want to invest the cash, but he'll give you a loan or something, and government entitlements. Item 5 is simply, they're going to want to copy your land purchase agreement. They're going to want to see your site plan. Copy an environmental assessment report, which is important because of stormwater retention and how you handle that's more important with single family subdivisions now than ever. And that's part of the environmental assessment. How are you going to handle that? And anyway, so that's kind of a checklist. It could be more involved in that than what I showed, but it could be less involved too. It just depends on your experience. So I came up with what I call Southwest Heritage Subdivision. And this is, first of all, does anybody else have any other questions?
I think we're good so far.
Okay. Are we flowing okay?
We're flowing okay. Keep going.
All right. So I call this the Southwest Heritage Subdivision. And I'm just showing you what a broad model would look like. It's going to be more involved in this, but this would be something that, you could use as a kind of an illustration of what you might do as far as a presentation. So we go to figure 1, the next page 2, I think. I talk about, the project summary. And this could be, this was done very succinctly. I just kind of prepared this for you, but, general information about the property. And it kind of dovetails to the checklist I was showing. It shows the site characteristics, phase 1, phase 2, so on and so forth. I mean, I hope that's pretty still type of lots you got in there to talk about site amenities, subdivision. I mean, these are all things that it's not easy to do this. This takes a lot of time I came up with this because of my experience, but you've got to the developers have got to live this. They've got to understand what this is going to be. So and a lot of this is going to be generated from the market analysis that you're going to use. They're going to tell you, or should tell you broadly, what you can develop there. And that's why banks like to see it. And that's, again, I want to emphasize, that's one of the first things you do after you identify your site. Let's get a market analysis. And those providers will help you. I get down into what kind of subdivision site amenities you're going to provide. It goes anywhere from just a really nice entrance and landscaping to a clubhouse and a pool, and how you're going to handle utilities and street lights and curbing and all that stuff. And then the market concept, which is you talk about the target price range for the home and lot. And that's really on a market analysis. And I would suspect in your territory, if we're building new homes today in $150,000 to $200,000 range, total sales price, one thing to consider is you got to talk to the vertical developer of the home, and can he sell that? And then their costs are going up for homes today. That's one of the problems we got, is that commodity prices are up high. So in the appraisal world, we call it land residual technique. So just consider this: you sell a house for $200,000, it costs you $100,000 to build the house, and then it costs you $25,000 for all the soft costs. That leaves $75,000 for profit and the lot. And how much profit do developers make on vertical? 20%, 15%, whatever they want to make. So anyway, the next page is really it deals with the lot allocation and how you're going to allocate your lots, that type of thing. And it gives you an inventory of lots. So again, this is an illustration. I think the interesting there is the lot ratio, and then the other thing that they commonly use is the number of lots per acre. The density that I've seen is about 2.5 to 3 lots per acre. So this one was divided into 1/5 acres, 1/4, 1/3, so on and so forth. So kind of gives you an idea where how that would work out. If we go to the next page, I get back to the level of market study, and I think it depends a lot on the experience of the developer and the major players involved with it. If I go to Huntingburg, then they know what, when I talked to Jane Hendrickson about her subdivision, for example, that was a development looking for a developer, not a developer looking for a site. And so her market analysis needs wasn't as great as if it was a site looking for or a developer looking for a site, because the developer in that case, she knew what she had to do, or knew, generally speaking, the first baseline and the third baselines were already set. A fundamental demand analysis probably maybe wasn't as necessary there as if you just take a raw land, a developer says, I'd like to develop that. Well, what are you going to develop it as? Well, you better get into a fundamental demand analysis. I think she had a market analysis done, and I believe that was what I would call an inferred demand study. It wasn't as complicated. It's not going to be as expensive, but they knew what they wanted to develop. The city of Huntingburg wanted to know. They knew. They had the government capital identified. They had TIF financing identified. And Jane was out looking for a loan with a local bank. I think German American Bank ended up doing that loan for her. She had adeptly identified a vertical developer out of Kentucky that would come in and do the homes. It's an exclusive development, meaning that they're the only ones that can develop there. So that was an easier situation to, and nothing's ever easy, but that was an easier situation than if you just start from a different perspective of, hey, Ed, there's 60 acres here. We want to develop it. And I understand in some parts of your country, undulation is an issue. And not only is it undulation, but you have things called rock, which costs a lot of money. And those are the kind of things that would go into that the market analysis would not address. The developer would have to get into, well, what are my costs going to be? And then you'd have to talk with your market analysis contractor and say, okay, my costs are going to be $25,000 an acre, not $10,000 an acre. So how does that impact the price?
Hey, Ed, while we're
Yeah.
talking about cost on infrastructure, we do have a question. Do you
Yeah.
have a lot per acre ratio for areas that do not have sewer systems and you have to install septics?
Honest question is, no, I don't. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Most local governments don't want septic systems. They and it's because of U.S. standards and other things. Now, that's not to say in some of these small areas that is what you're going to have to deal with, which is how are you going to handle storm sewers? How are you going to handle sanitary? But I don't have anything for that. I think you'd have to go back to you'd have to consult with the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. You'd have to talk with the local city engineer or the surveyor. I mean, if you're in a county and there's no zoning out there, I still think you have to stop at the state level and you have to deal with the stormwater and then what IDEM wants you to do. I would think that the density, honestly, is not. Jane's development at Henningsburg was 2.9 lots per acre. I would think in that situation, it may be 2 lots an acre or 1 lot an acre, because those septic fields, depends what you're going to build, could be large and it could be even more to that. So you're going to have to. I don't have that, honestly, but I would expect that density to be a lot less with septics than you would with sewers for lots of reasons.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So again, I would suggest the market analysis is very important here. Without it, you're not going to get a loan. You don't even know the feasibility of your project. And it's very important to hire someone who has the experience and the knowledge and familiarity with your communities, because there's so many, and that's where a developer or your organization can help, and they can talk to the mayor or the economic development commissioner or whoever is there and start with that perspective. Your analysis that you did shows a broad situation, and I have no doubt that there's a demand for housing in those areas. It's just the question is, what's going to be the home that's going to be offered in the marketplace? Is it going to be 150,000? It's going to be 250,000. And the market right now is desperately seeking, even on the multifamily side, Fannie and Freddie. I mean, I was on calls with them yesterday on the multifamily side. They are emphasizing workforce housing, which is lower income housing, affordable housing. And that's where we talked about the 3 forms of capital, which is debt, equity, and government capital. That's where the government capital is coming to play in the affordability side. So you have to consider that in your capital stack. And your capital stack is the total cost of the development. And then you're going to find a source for all those costs, including profit. So anyway, we can go on to the next page, please. Thanks for doing that for me. This is just kind of an indication of, kind of a schedule you'd come up with. I know some of this may be fundamental, but it's really important. And you have to, and these dates could change. I mean, I had the date started, last month. The start date was 6 months later. You got a construction period, 6 months, and that's for the lot, your sectional development, probably one or two sections at a time. And then when you're able to start those absorption, that's important. Uh, I just talk about again the lot summary and the inventory and the price points, and those are price points for homes and lots on a retail basis, not a wholesale basis. So that's what someone could afford. Can they afford that? And I would say also when we talked about, and that's why I quoted the interest rates on home mortgages today. I like to call it the purchasing power of the mortgage dollar, and it's quite high right now. At 3% interest rate, you can borrow a lot of money in a mortgage relative to the amount of income that you're making. If rates are at 6%, you would have to borrow less money than relative to the income that you're making. You couldn't afford a higher priced home. So that's why housing is so strong right now. The rates are so low and the purchasing power of the mortgage dollar is high. And that's a key thing in your market analysis to understand where the economy is going, where the local economy is going, where the people are going to be able to get their mortgages. And that's going to determine the price points for your houses. We just go on to the page 8, please. This is something that, and maybe it may not be pertinent to the markets we're talking about, but as a developer or whatever, I would go out and do my own analysis and try and find comparable housing and comparable lots of what I'm doing and check the market to make sure that what I'm offering is right. And I would suggest that in some of these smaller communities, a good source of information is through the Indiana Realty Commission, but they got publications about what home prices are going for, average price home sales. And I get that older homes are probably not what are comparable to newer homes, but they are an indicator. And I would say at the low end of the range, they're an indicator of the average price. And there's a lot of variables there. If you're trying to attract new employees, what's the average wage going to be and what can they afford and what do they want? And new homes sell better than old homes. So you could probably infer a higher price for a newer home. So again, that's just an example. Again, this is high level. This is typical what we would do to put a package together to go out and seek the capital stack for the property. Go on to page 9, please. That's simply just an absorption analysis. Time frames and they're usually done by quarters. That's usually not a monthly thing. You would use a monthly absorption if you're doing a 600 lot subdivision. But if you do 144 lots or 100 lot subdivision, you're going to do it by quarter. And this is something that's dynamic. You watch that all the time, and you start off with an initial schedule, and then you compare how well you're doing. There could be all sorts of reasons why it's not accurate because you got a slow start to development. There was maybe the economy had a hiccup. Again, I don't think that's going to happen in the next 3 years, but that's just another schedule. Go to the next page, please. This is just another forecast. The year's obviously not wrong. 2005, 6, and 7 to be the current ones, but just again, it's just a summary. And then let's go back to page 11, please. So this is, and most banks and I think equity players are going to use a discounted cash flow analysis and sellout analysis to determine the value of the property. And that value should be greater than the cost. If it's less than the cost, it's not feasible. And so a lot of that's going to be dependent upon your cash flow time frame. And it just simply, and this is a simple analysis you can use on an Excel spreadsheet. I've got them. Most appraisers and market analysis people are going to come up with this type of thing for you. But it's simply, you do it by quarter, average. It's pretty easy to go through the math. And they're using a present value calculation. And I think the interesting thing here is you got sales charges for each lot, your real estate taxes, the miscellaneous expenses, which are closing, title, legal, all that stuff. And then you got an inferred line item profit. And some deals are done without a profit. You don't put a profit line in there. Or in some opportunities have a profit. I'm going to make, on every lot sold, I'm going to make a profit. I'm going to put it in there. And that depends on lots of variables. Most banks do not like to show a profit on lots, at least initial sections, because there's a lot of risk associated with this. So you have a net proceeds number. If you do the math and do the present value factor, and that 12.3% there, it has an indication of a profit in it. And that's a pretty high discount rate. And that's what you're going to find in subdivisions. The discount rate is high. If you compare that to an apartment deal today, a discount factor that would be used, the apartment discount factor would probably be more like 6 or 7%. So you can see that relative on a housing comparison, it's a lot higher because the risk with single family housing traditionally has been a lot riskier than it has been in the last year. And that's what you're going to have. So you have a present value calculation, and then the present value, that's 3,813,000, just an example. And you got and again, I apologize for this. I should have said that everybody should have a chart of definitions that's commonly used in single family development. And I'm not going to refer to it, but that's what those are. When I talk about things and you want to know what I'm talking about, what that means, refer to that definitions list. That'll help you. I'm also available for anybody else on this call. If there's another definition or another thing that you don't understand, just give me a call and I'll walk you through it. I'm happy to do that for you. But that's what those definitions are for. And those definitions are kind of germane to single family development. Some of them are common terms and some of them aren't. So when you at least ought to act like you know what you're talking about. So the analysis summary is just a gross sellout value. You got all those charges associated with it, a line item profit, and so your bulk sale value is 3.8 million compared to 5.2 million in gross sales. So you can see the rest, all those other deductions from that are your cost to sell the property, to sell the lots. And in this situation, as an example, if you found a vertical developer, you would sell that lot to that developer for that price. And that would be a release from the mortgage. And to release it from the mortgage, when I talk about the lender's going to want probably 75 or 80% of that sales price to release that individual lot from their mortgage. So you've got to release, you've got to put that in your model too. That's not in this one. Let's see. You go to page 12. All that is just a different analysis using a different present value factor. I'm just showing the differences. And look at the difference. The present value factor is 8.4 versus 12. You can see the difference in the value. So that's just an example there. Page 13 is the example that I was trying to talk about, where there's no profit generated from the sales. But look at the present value factor. It's a lot higher. It's 28%. So understand that if I refer to a percent number, a discount factor, that's not cast in stone, but it's an indication that the present value factor without profit in your sale is going to be substantially higher than one if you already have profit in there. So it's still, if you look at this factor, it's just how you present it to the market and how you want to present it in a market. And go to page 14. I just talk about holding costs and what those are. There could be more than this. The miscellaneous line item can contain a lot of other things on detail that we could put in there. Sales charges on sales costs. You're going to have somebody market your property, and the lots have to be marketed, and you're going to have costs associated with selling those lots. So, and then depending on real estate taxes, I don't know. Some of this raw land in state of Indiana, as you know, taxes are assessed in arrears, and they're not going to assess a raw land until you've got it platted, and then it's going to be a year after that. So the hope is that there's not going to be much real estate taxes load on a sale of a property, at least in our marketplace, but it could happen. Go on to page 17, please. I'm sorry, it should be 18, I guess. I had a page, my pagination was wrong. This page 18. Look at the top of page 18. So you can see the graph. Go up a little bit more. There you go. Okay. So this is a typical kind of timeline scenario, how things work. So time one would be and this is what values are that you have to understand. And this is the complication in single family subdivision analysis and valuation. You've got different points along the development time frame where you have different values that people key on. And you have to be mindful of those because those have different values or importance to lenders at different times. You got this, you start with raw land value, and I kind of give you what that is there. And then land value with entitlement. So you've increased value of the land because you've got it entitled and ready to go. And the next one is construction completed and a no lot sale. So that's the most riskiest part of the deal. You have extended yourself on all the capital into the property, and you're ready to sell the lots, and they're platted. And in most cases, there's going to be a section. And then along that timeline, you've got remaining lot inventory, just inventory that you have and how quickly you can sell that. And at the end, so from a discounted cash flow analysis, the thing interesting about subdivisions is that there is no reversionary value. In commercial real estate, you got value of the income stream, especially apartments, for example, where you have rent during the period of time, and then at the end of the holding period, the property has value. You can capitalize that; it's got value. Subdivisions, it's kind of like probably a quarry pit where, you know, at some point in time, the value of the quarry is really high because you got all the sand and gravel and you're getting ready to take it out. But after you take all the sand and gravel out, the reversionary value is a little bit. But in subdivisions, there's nothing left. You've sold everything. So there's no reversionary value. So that's important to know and try and estimate as quickly as possible and as with as much credibility what those lot sales are going to be. Go to the next page, please. One more down. I'm sorry. The page. And I really apologize for my paginations. And one more down. All right. Yeah. So this is just an example of, you know, market A versus market B. And it talks about, if you look at the red bar graph and the yield and profit, it has to do with risk. And if you look at market A, you end up there's not much risk or profit in the first part because it's an easier thing to do, but you make a lot of profit at the end. Market B, you look at, it's a different characteristic. So the point I'm trying to make here with this graph is there's different profits to be made depending on the strengths and attributes of your development. And um, it's dynamic. It's very hard to ascertain without a market analysis. And then even that's not gonna, that's just some informed person's idea of what you're gonna look like. Your actual performance is gonna be based on what the market's gonna allow you to do. And this is just an example of how you can, what the risk associated with different types of scenarios there. So that's really the extent of my my presentation. I can open it up for more discussion. And I covered a lot of information that takes a long time to develop, and it's not that easy to do. But from the perspective of the people on this webinar, they have to appreciate what goes into a development process, what's required from a lender's perspective, from a capital perspective. So
it's a lot of information. It might take a little bit of time to digest.
Yeah,
so
I know.
You may end up with some questions later, but we would be happy to open it up to questions. So if anybody's got any, please put them in the chat and we'll entertain them. If you have any follow-up questions later on, if you email them to me, we can make sure that we get them to Mr. Chandler. Hang on a second. It might take people a second to.
I don't know. No, look, this is why subdivision development is taking on a new form right now. What we have in our marketplace is you have different players doing the horizontal development and different players doing the vertical. Before, you had people doing both. And the reason is there's a high risk with the horizontal development. The perspective that I gave early shows that we're in a really great state from single family subdivision analysis and development right now. It's unbelievable.
And we should hopefully we'll get to take advantage of it.
Right. And I think it'll be that way for a while. I really do. I think more people are wanting to own a home because they can afford to do it and it's their house.
Yeah.
And the difficulty is, and I having experience, I have the benefit of experience, but I had a major player in Indianapolis, and they were well connected, highly capitalized. And from 2000, they started doing subdivision development in the late 90s. And from 2000 to 2005, they were doing 600-700 lots a year and generating a tremendous amount of money. And then the impact of the Great Recession hit, and they were the carry of a lot development, and that's where you have to balance it out. It was costing $2.5 million a quarter out of pocket. They ended up losing everything.
Well,
they lost it all.
That is,
and you don't want to get ahead of yourself on section and lot inventory. You just don't want to do it.
Well, we do have some questions that have popped up. So let's see. Have you seen anyone successfully doing affordable housing subdivisions working with tax credits?
No.
Okay, and just so that you know, we are talking to some tax credit providers, and we may offer a workshop on that at a later date.
Yeah, so in my analysis, and I would tell you, the reason I haven't seen it is affordable housing has been, for the most part, focused on rental. There has been a few affordable housing situations that have been developed, single family residential for rent. Right. People are building single family residential for rent. My fundamental analysis would be no different using affordable housing. The source of capital would be the tax credits, the TIFs, everything else. So we talked about debt, we talked about equity, we talked about government capital. In this situation, the benefits for affordable housing, I would classify in the government capital category, or maybe your debt category, where you could get a better leverage point for affordable housing. But the analysis is still going to be the same.
And
It's
part of the
just,
reason that we aren't seeing a lot of single family affordable or tax credit single family housing development is because of the way the QAP has been written to give preferential points to rental housing. But I have in Bloomington seen a single family development that was done with tax credits, but they rented the units, their rent to own units, and that was the way
yeah,
that they got around that
that,
QAP. But that could be a conversation for another day. We have a few
yeah, it
more
can be.
questions.
It is amazing the number of large capital sources that are getting into single family residential for rent. And I'm talking major players. And so, that's a possibility and that's an opportunity. And I'm not trying to, I'm just saying that as where the market is. But you can build these things and at least to rent is a good option. But then that's where you're going to have to get into the financing side is who's going to carry the end loan.
Right.
You're going to have to go to a bank and say, hey, I've got five properties or rent to own. Will you give me a mortgage on these? And they'll treat that like a rental property. And that's what it is, a rent to own. And then you're going to have the flexibility in your debt to say, okay, I want to release this house, just like a lot development. I want to release this one mortgage from your pool, and this is how much it's going to cost me. So you sell it, and you can make arrangements for the owner of that property with the bank to get a loan. But it's just like the structure's still the same. It's just it's how complicated things can get.
It is a complicated structure. Okay, we have a couple more questions here. So what do you see as an opportunity for someone who owns the land but needs assistance in development? And she has a couple of other questions, so I'm gonna add those to it because they may impact your answer. It's in a rural location without strong government assistance. And then she wants to know, do you see any trends for senior single family housing in rural communities?
So a lot of that depends on the demand. I mean, what if you got a really nice piece of land and you want to develop it, for example, for senior housing, you have to understand where the demand is and are people going to want to rent or are they going to want to own? And if you're a seniors community, then I would think your linkages to shopping, healthcare, travel, those type of things, amenity package would have to be different. I have not seen that. I do know that people, I will tell you, there is a trend, and again, it's a pandemic trend, as I call it, a trend of people moving out of high dense locations to more rural locations. And the amount of people moving out of New York City and moving out of San Francisco and moving to these big communities as they get older, they want to go to smaller communities. Now, Pulte is a developer who has a subdivision geared to senior housing. And again, that's in a major area. And I realize my answer is not the right one for whoever asked that question, because if you're in a rural community, Pulte's not going to come down there and do that development. But I think you would have to think about what you want as a senior, what's important to you. You don't want to have to maintain things that much, or you want lower maintenance, you want access to a highway and to a doctor or a hospital and to shopping, and you want something to do. How are you going to spend your life sitting at home watching a big screen TV? No, you want to get out and walk around. So the advantage of a rural location is maybe you've got those trails or you got those park systems, but as baby boomers get older, we're active. We're going to want that. And those are the kind of things that would attract people. What my dad and mother want are not what I want today, and it's not going to want what my daughter wants. So the analysis has to get back to talking to what is it you try, what's your vision, and what do you think will sell? And you don't know if you don't know what's going to sell, then you have to talk to an expert who can help you with that.
Okay. I want to make sure we don't miss her first part of that question about if you already own the land but you need some assistance in the development. Who would you contact?
So, and again, is this premised on the fact that she's not in or they're not in a city or town? It's just countywide zoning. Is that it?
That would be my assumption, yes.
Yeah. So I would talk to depending what county you're in, I can help that person whatever with a reference, but I would talk to an appraiser, not just this, not, I'd talk to an MAI appraiser who can help them develop a market analysis and market study as to, and that's probably when we talk about the various types of market analysis, it would be more inferred rather than fundamental, meaning judgments, quality, be less costly, but they would focus you more on what you think is appropriate. Those are the expertise that you need. And then from that, it may lead to something different. But then I'd talk to the county engineers and what's the availability of, the utilities. What's going to be your requirement for utilities, if any? Can you just sink wells in a septic? What kind of street quality? I mean, there's all those things you have to get involved with.
All right, we have a couple more questions. The next one is there a rule of thumb for the minimum lot number for development to be sustainable?
A density situation.
Mhm.
Depends on the price of the land. The price depends on what the costs are, and then what the sale prices are going to be. I will tell you that if I look at Jane's subdivision down in Huntingburg, their homes are going from 175 to 225, and I think they're starting to get a little higher now because of the market. And her density is 3 per acre. And if I compare that to something up in Hamilton County, the density is going to be 4 per acre, and the home prices are going to be $500,000.
Yeah.
So you got to do that analysis as to where it is. There isn't a rule of thumb. I think in a rural area, I would tell you that the density is going to be less and the prices are going to be lower. But that means your land doesn't have much value. But the land productivity says, hey, I don't have to deal with rock. I don't have to deal too much with sewer and water. It's ease of development, my costs. My land's worth more. But if I have to deal with low density, home prices that are low, and I got a lot of development, my land value, the residual value of the land is going to be less. It's hard to say.
Okay, so I'm also going to do a little commercial for our session that we did last week. If you missed it, you can go back and see it on our website. And there are some documents attached to it, including an Excel spreadsheet to develop a pro forma. And while that is developed for rental housing, a lot of the same principles would apply for single family development. So you might be able to modify it to work for that as well.
I think I've got some Excel. I put all mine in PDF format.
Yes.
I'm happy to give you the Excels.
That would be lovely. We would love to have those, and we can post those on our website.
Yeah, I'm happy I just didn't, the awkwardness of this, I just didn't know how to do that. But I'm happy to give those to you, and then they can use them themselves.
That would be great. Okay, we have another question, and this is gonna throw you into the deep end of a political discussion that we're having here in Bloomington. So I'm gonna ask you the question, then I'm gonna have a comment, and then I'm gonna let you answer it, okay? So the question is, can Mr. Chandler speak to the profitability of purchasing single-family homes in already dense and developed urban neighborhoods and converting them into multifamily through duplex, triplex, and quads?
Well,
So to give you a little bit of background, the city of Bloomington is updating its Unified Development Ordinance. And one of the things that they have proposed in their development ordinance is that they increase the density in the single family neighborhoods to allow for duplexes, triplexes, and quads to be developed. So I think you need to take it in 2 pieces. One is you buy an existing structure and you modify the existing structure to hold multiple units. And the second one would be to purchase a property and then reconstruct a duplex, triplex, and quad on it. And you also should know that most of the core neighborhoods are covered by either historic preservation regulations and or demolition delay. So tearing down something would not be simple for most areas. And then there's the housing costs in Bloomington. So with all of that, what do you think?
Well, that's a difficult and challenging proposition, because the first thing you got to get through is, what are they going to let you do to the site? You go back and take your site and do an inventory. What do I have? What's the size of the site? What's the adaptability of the site to different uses? And then the important thing is, what in Bloomington, what are they going to let you develop? Because in appraisal, there's a fundamental analysis that's done the very first, and that's the highest and best use of the site. Physically able, financially feasible, what government's going to allow you to build, and then of all the variables, you come out with the one that's the best and most opportunistic or most economically beneficial. In this situation, I would think that the value creation of just being able to develop something you can look at something, and the first thing I would do is say, physically, what can the site accommodate? What are my parking requirements, my setback requirements? What can I accommodate? Then you can go and say, are they going to let me build this? If they're not going to let you build it, then you're going to have to adjust physically what you can do. The feasibility gets back to cost versus value. How much value you're going to create. I would think with the restrictions that Bloomington's putting on these things, that the rent or the value or whatever is going to be less or higher, I'm sorry, because you're going to have to get a higher rent just to justify what you're doing. I mean, that's the problem with what they're doing. They're basically, I don't know if they're trying to make it more affordable to live in Bloomington or not, but their actions are making things more expensive, because you have to go through the zoning and government process. And then if you're restricting if you're saying, hey, I got a quarter acre here, I can build physically 10 units on it. Well, Bloomington says you can only use 5. Well, the land analysis is going to tell you, again, land is what falls out at the end of the value after all your costs are taken care of, except land. In order to get that value up in the land, you're going to have to charge more rent or get higher price. So if they restrict density and then the facade development, and I think it's very challenging.
Now, would that analysis change if it were a vacant lot that they were able to develop and put additional units on it?
Well, I mean, maybe if the zoning allows you to do you don't have to deal with historical issues. You don't have to deal with. In Indianapolis, what they're doing here to avoid that, they're going downtown core areas, taking old houses and just tearing them down, keeping the foundation the same, essentially. They may keep some of the walls and go up and just modernize the entire structure from the ground up. That's what, but their density is not any different. They're still having and they're avoiding and circumventing the current building codes, setback, not building codes, but zoning requirements by having the existing foundation.
Yeah, in Bloomington, we have what's commonly referred to as demolition delay. So this is an ordinance that if your structure is on the state survey of historic structures, and I think there's about 6,000 units on that survey in Bloomington, then in order to remove and I honestly don't remember anymore, which is kind of embarrassing because I used to be involved in this. But if you're going to remove a certain percentage of that structure, you have to go through the demolition delay process, which gives the Historic Preservation Commission an opportunity to designate the property if they feel that it has value in saving it. So it seems unlikely that Bloomington would be able to do what they're doing in Indianapolis, which would be tear something down to the foundation without going through that process. But if the property was a vacant lot already, and rent prices, by the way, Mr. Chandler, are the highest in the state in Bloomington. So we do have
no doubt.
Yeah, we do have pretty high rentals. I think you went to school here, right? So you
Yeah, I
have
did.
some familiarity with the area.
Yeah.
You might be able to do something in that regard. But what about utilizing an existing structure and turning it into a duplex? Would that, how much value would a duplex add to a property versus two single-family homes?
Well, you-
That's a
if you're
question I got asked in the chat, by the way.
everything else being equal, if you can get if you can get higher revenue on a rent side by doing a duplex, it's going to have higher value. That's fundamental.
Right.
The issue you got is, are you going to sell these, or are you going to rent them? And if you're going to rent them, then the higher density, the more revenue you can generate on that site, whether it's a single or a double or a quad or whatever, the higher the value is going to be.
Yeah, I think some of the thing that's generating this conversation here in Bloomington is a concept called missing middle housing. So if you missed our session on missing middle housing, it's recorded and available on our website. And they do talk about the missing middle housing units, which would be things like duplexes and triplexes. And they use examples from urban areas where people would build duplexes, live in part of it, and rent the other portion of the structure.
What we have going on up in our marketplace is a thing called ADUs.
We have that here as well.
And that's their way of addressing that issue. They're going to have an auxiliary dwelling unit on your site, which means one more.
Yeah.
And that's how they're trying to, but there's a pushback on that too, because what they're doing that, how they're using that is a way to address affordable housing. Right. Well, they don't think that's doing it. So I don't know. I mean, I'd have to study that and review it. But I think the fundamentals get back down to how much more money can you generate, whether from a sale proceeds or an income proceeds, make you do that.
All right. Do we have any additional questions here today? Okay, I think that we are good. I want to thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us. We will post the Excel spreadsheets when you give them to us on our website.
I'll get them to you later today.
That would be fabulous.
Yeah.
And this session will be recorded and it will be posted on our website along with our other recorded sessions. If you missed any of our previous sessions, please go back and take a look. There's a wealth of information there. And then if you have any further questions or ideas, please include those in the follow-up survey that you will be sent as a participant. So thank you, participants, for joining us today. Thank you, Mr. Chandler, for sharing all of your expertise with us. It was greatly appreciated.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everybody. Be safe.